I'm Scott Tischler, lead pastor at Life Church, and this is a message from one of our recent services. I hope that it challenges, motivates, and encourages you to live out your faith each and every day. Thanks for joining us. Enjoy the message.
I'm going to preach to you today for the last bit of our parables for the summer. So, I'm also a children's pastor. So, you get this nice little graphic that I made, the parable of the lost sheep. Now, I'm a youth pastor as well, so sometimes I like a little participation. How many of y'all in here have been lost? And I'm not talking about the spiritual lost. I'm talking about like lost in directions. Yeah? All right, amen. I saw some wives nudging husbands, be like, yeah, you get lost every time you get in the car. And then I saw the husband nudge the wife and be like, yeah, every time you talk, I get lost. I don't understand it. Like, I got to put two and two together here. I see where the problem is. I get lost all the time. You know, I really do. Like, I don't like to admit it because I'm a Royal Ranger, but I do get lost. Yeah, unfortunately, my bearings are way up. Oh, kids, I'm sorry. You are dismissed if you'd like to leave. Kids, you are dismissed. We'll give them a second to head out. I got all excited. I'm used to seeing them, so we'll give them a minute. All right, good deal. So, like I said, I unfortunately get lost all the time. And again, my prior life, as you guys, most of you know, I wasn't a Christian. So a lot of things that you guys would be like, oh, that's God, or oh man, that's in the Word. Like I would just have never known. I had the benefit of working for one of the most amazing companies here in the state of Virginia for about 3 years, and that company was U-Crops. And in that time frame, yes, I was a Ucropian. It was cool. I had good grades. I was a good person. But in that time frame, I had to learn the U-Crop way, which at the time I didn't realize was the Christian way. And as we talk today about the parable of the lost sheep, we're going to talk about like whether you're the sheep at the time or whether you're the shepherd at the time. But U-Crops was teaching me to be a shepherd. And they had this rule that I thought was crazy because I never really understood it. But when somebody's lost, when you're a sheep and you're lost, or, you know, when you're lost, you get worried. You get upset, right? You start to be fearful. You start to make rash decisions because you're confused as to where you're going. You're kind of going left to right, up and down, and you're just frustrated, right? Well, U-Crops' old philosophy was to be a good shepherd. And I realize that now because how many of y'all have gone through a grocery store and I don't know why, but none of them are laid out the same, right? Right? No Kroger is laid out like any other Kroger. No U-Crop, I take that back. U-Crops was the closest one I've ever seen laid out to be almost the same. But here's what U-Crops taught us. They always taught us that if somebody came to you lost in the aisle and said, hey, where's the mayonnaise? We weren't allowed to just point and go, yeah, it's like 6 aisles down. You make a left and you turn right, past the jelly, there's an end cap there with some Fritos, and then you're going to go back around. We weren't allowed to do that because in Mr. U-Crop's eyes, that's not being a good shepherd. See, the good shepherd's going to take you. So we would have to stop. It didn't matter if I was stocking a shelf. It didn't matter what I was doing. If I was mopping the floor, I'd have to stop and pick up what I was doing and then leave and carry them basically, you know, walk side by side and go, oh, down to the aisle and go, it's right here. Because in those moments, as the shepherd, I was leading the sheep to exactly where they needed to go. The fear was removed, the doubt was removed, the frustration was removed, and that's what made U-Crops different. Now, I look back now and realize, okay, he was a Christian. I get it. I didn't know that at the time. I just thought it was a really clean, good working company. But I say all that to say, let's go into our Bibles and read from Luke 15, 3-7. I'll give you a minute to get there. That's Luke 15, 3 through 7. I'm not going to put it up on the stage because I spent a lot of time on that, so we'll leave that up there. All right. Now the tax collectors and sinners were gathering all around to hear Jesus, but the Pharisees and the teachers of the law muttered. So this is saying that within a mix of group, there are tax collectors, there's sinners, and there's Pharisees and the teachers, and they're all together. They're all hanging out. They're all in a group, right? Because Jesus is around. This man welcomes sinners and eats with them. Man, that's disgusting. Can you believe that this guy who claims to be the Son of God opens up his table, opens up his surrounding area and his time for these nasty, dirty, sinner people? That's terrible. So then Jesus, being the amazingly smart man he is, says in the parable, suppose one of you has 100 sheep and loses one of them. Now, I was talking with a friend of mine this week. I think that's great because if you're talking about these hierarchy type people, Jesus is so good at what he does because he tells a story and he makes you step into somebody that you're not. Because these Pharisees, these rulers, right, they would never lower themselves to be a shepherd. The shepherd is the lowest form of basically work that you can be. But he puts them into that grouping and says, no. I want you guys to put yourself into the eyes of a shepherd. He says, doesn't he leave the 99 in the open country and go after the lost sheep until he finds it? And when he finds it, he joyfully puts on his shoulders and goes home. Then he calls his friends and neighbors together and says, rejoice with me, I have found my lost sheep. I tell you that in the same way, there will be more rejoicing in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who do not repent. So today, we're going to kind of look at this differently because a lot of times we focus on the shepherd. And we'll get to the shepherd for sure. But I want to talk a minute about the sheep. Sheep aren't exactly what you would call the king of the jungle, right? And if you guys were talking about sheep, we're talking about us, right? So we're more docile for the most part. We're gentle. We can't really protect ourselves, but for most, especially from like evil, right? With evil things, like a wolf. If there's a sheep running through the countryside by himself, and there's a wolf stalking after him, who's going to win? The wolf. On his own account, the sheep cannot defend himself from a wolf. It's just impossible. What is he going to bat him to death? It's just not going to work, right? So who are the sheep? You and I, we are the sheep. And the sheep are the ones that Jesus comes to seek and save. And we're defenseless and we're easy to catch. It's unfortunate. We are defenseless and we're easy to catch in the spiritual world. How many of y'all have been spiritually lost? Anybody? Anybody confident up there? I have. I've been tore up. Even after becoming a Christian, I still felt spiritually lost at times. And I needed a shepherd. And not only was I lost, but as a sheep, we can be gullible, right? And I know that kind of gives sheep like they have a rational thought, but they really don't. But they are gullible. They're very easy to mislead. Very easy to mislead. They can be astray by their appetites, right? Easiest thing to do to get a sheep to come to you is what? Feed it. Offer it food. I could go to Maymont Park right now, get a handful of seed, walk down the fence line, and the sheep will follow me the entire way. Now, I would never do that because there's no way that tongue is going to get on my hands. For those of you who know me, that's not happening. But truth be told, they would follow if I allowed. Matter of fact, they're so dumb sometimes that I could never feed them and I could just walk them down the fence and I would throw the food. Now, that's a terrible thing to do. I wouldn't do that. But I could just throw the food out and the sheep would sit there and stare. If you look at that as us, as sheep, we're just as gullible sometimes. But our appetite is not for that food like the sheep. Our appetite is for the things of this world. Our appetite is for the things that the world is offering, that God is trying to keep us from, but the world is trying to shove down our throats. And the ways of the world are easier. It's easy to just fall into that trap. It's easy to be gullible and misled, right? Happens to me, right? I think I'm walking down a good old path and the world smack me right in the face and say, hey, hold up. I know you want this. You definitely want to get a piece of this over here. And I'll be led astray. A sheep can be led astray so easy because we have what's called mob mentality. We go with what others do or what we see other people do. When I was a kid, I was probably 6 years old. I went to the state fair with my mom and dad, and this was way back in the land before cell phones, right? So I was following my dad. It was unseasonably cold in September. I remember that, and my dad had on this nice brown leather jacket. It was really cool. It was really unique. It was kind of a suede leather thing. And I was following my dad, and there was hundreds and hundreds of people here back when the state fair was really, really big. Hundreds of people, probably thousands. And I'm following behind him, and then I stop over here to look at something because I'm 6. And then I peer back up, and then I see the brown suede leather jacket that my dad was wearing. So then for 15 minutes, I proceed to follow the brown suede leather jacket. And we travel from one end of the state park to the other. And it wasn't until I went to go and reach for my father's hand to realize that that wasn't my father. And I was terribly, terribly scared. But that sheep, gullible, mob-following mentality had kicked in. I followed the jacket. I didn't follow the word of my father, the voice of my father. I followed who I thought was leading me in the right direction. It was this random guy. Now, for the next, I don't know, probably about an hour and a half, because again, there were no cell phones, we tried to find my parents. And that was a cool aspect because that was the first time that I realized now, as a Christian, that God was kind of saying, hey, we're going to stop everything because that's what happened. All the local workers right there that were surrounding the area I was at stopped what they were doing, stopped working with those people, and tried to help me find my parents. And thankfully, once I was found, I was whipped severely. But, you know, hey, it's 1987, so that's what we do. But if you don't think that's true, if you don't think you're gullible, if you don't think there's a mob mentality, I want to point out back in 1962 with one of the most famous historical examples of the mob mentality. And that happened and occurred in Massachusetts. It was the Salem witch trials, all right? So 2 girls ages 9 and 11 began to act kind of strangely back in 1692. There was blasphemous screaming, seizures, trance-like stares, and again, I'm not a doctor. I'm actually going to school to be a pastor, but that sounds like Tourette's, right? But unfortunately, Dr. Turner didn't make that discovery until 1884. But that didn't matter because at this point in time, everybody concluded that there was no medical reason that these girls were having these issues, and they guaranteed 100% that they were under Satan's attack, and they were influenced by Satan. These girls eventually identified 3 women as witches who would put them under this condition. One of them confessed to witchcraft, and the ball rolls from there, and 20 people die because of the Salem witch trials. That's an example of sheep mob justice. We as sheep are gullible to follow the crowd. Who knows, right? I wonder that all the time. Do y'all ever stop and wonder, like, sicknesses that we have today that may have been around back then, does that explain a lot of the odd things that happen in life? I mean, who's to say those girls were influenced by Satan and under witchcraft? Or who's to say they just didn't have a medical condition? But the problem is once we get something in our heads that it's bad, that means there's no redemption. And we as Christians sometimes are the worst at that. We are the worst at saying, hey, you're too far from me. You're way outside of my spectrum that I like to deal with, so I'm going to put a line between us, and I'm going to walk over here. And then you can deal with your people over here while us 4 and no more are standing here. And that's the problem we have. We have to get away from that us 4 and no more mentality, and we got to realize that God created his kingdom for everyone. Everyone. It's his job to save and restore. It's our job to lead them and show them how to get there. So let's look at the shepherd, all right? So we talked about you guys as sheep, me included, right? Being gullible, being easy to fool. Did I just flick that? Oh, there we go. So now we have a picture of the sheep in Jesus' story here. A defenseless, we're Gentile, unable to stand up to our predators, and we're willing to follow anyone that can help us. So we need a shepherd. We need a good shepherd. We need a shepherd that is righteous. We need a shepherd that is true. We need a shepherd that is God-fearing. We need a shepherd that is God-believing. Not just anyone will do. Now, right now, currently, I am having the blessing of being able to shepherd you guys. But as you guys walk through the doors, some of you will turn from the sheep to the shepherd. And I don't think that everybody in this room or people that are listening may understand that fully. You're not always the sheep. You're sometimes called to be the shepherd. We read here in the story that we just had, the parable, that there was a total of 100 sheep and only one wanders away. But instead of just being content with the 99 safe and sound, the owner of the sheep, he goes off to find the one who was lost, and when he finds it, he comes back celebrating. It's a nice story today, but if we look at it from the standpoint of first century Jew, who is Jesus talking to here? It makes even more sense. We learn so much from few verses that we look through the eyes of the ones who heard these words pass from Jesus' lips. So first, we need to look at the economics of the sheep, all right? So we look at the economics of the sheep. Number one, sheep were the most important and valuable livestock that was there. They didn't eat a lot of meat back then because it was expensive, but when they did, they ate sheep. Anybody ever had sheep here? Hey, all right, okay. Lots of lamb? I have not. It's something I won't eat, never. That's weird. If it's not, just so you know, Pastor Dustin, if you bring me over your house, if it's store-bought, I love it. If it's shot or murder on your farm, I'm probably not going to eat it. I'll be the first to die in the apocalypse, as Pastor Scott has told you. So, Lord, please rapture me early. Thank you. All right, amen. But this was probably because of the lamb sacrificed so they could attain meat. But regardless, sheep were the main source of meat. They were even more important because of the wool that they produced. It was obviously used for clothing and stuff, but it was a very valuable animal. So if you had lots of sheep, you were a wealthy dude, all right? And I mean, you had tons of money. The guy with 100 sheep was obviously rich. He had to be rich to have that many sheep. It takes a little bit to arrive at this, so I'm going to go through it real quick. First, there was virtually no middle class in the Jewish culture back then. This was kind of pointed out to me in one of the books I was reading before my class. You're either rich like the Sadducees and the other rulers, or you're barely scratched enough to even get enough to eat. I would definitely be on that get enough to eat side. So you were either rich or you were poor. There was no middle class. So you either had a ton or you had little. Number two, we read in Leviticus that when a Hebrew woman gave birth, she was declared unclean. And she had to go to the temple to be purified. When she got to the temple, she had to offer 2 sacrifices, one of which was a lamb. And if she couldn't afford a lamb, then she had to bring 2 doves or young pigeons. So a poor person would definitely not have owned 100 sheep. Jesus' family wouldn't have been one of the rich people. Matter of fact, in Luke 2, we read that Mary had to offer the poorest offering. So basically the one who goes out looking for the sheep is rich. You see, he wasn't content to just write off the lost sheep as a business expense or a loss. He didn't look at what he had, but he looked at what he had lost. To a poor person, that definitely would have gone out and looked for the sheep because that's the only one, right? If I broke my TV at home, I would be upset because I only have one. I mean, my kids have them, but I'm not going to take from them. If my car breaks, I'm going to be upset because I only have one to get around. Now I've got to walk. I have to have that mentality about everything, right? I have that mentality of stuff here at the church. I look at everything like we only have one, because you never know when tithing is going to stop. You never know what's going to happen. So I have to look at stuff like I need to use it forever. That's how we should look at the sheep in our lives. We need to look at the sheep like every single one matters. And here's what I do. I challenge myself. Now, I used to be really good at it. When I first became a Christian, I was on fire, and I would go to places all the time, and I would try to shepherd people and get them to come to church. All the time, everywhere I went. It's so bad, my wife would literally be annoyed with me because I would keep going back and finding people to talk to. But as I have grown in my belief and in my understanding, I failed because I've only cut that back to about once a week kind of thing. Once a week, I can guarantee you, I go to a building during the weekday, and I meet and sit with about 40 or 50 sinners that are lost and broken, that are hurt, that are church hurt, that would never really step through the doors of any kind of church building. And I do that because, like I said earlier, God's kingdom was made for everybody. So why is it okay that they just sit there and flounder without a shepherd? Those people that I go see, they need a shepherd too. They need somebody to talk to. They need somebody to hear God's word. Because I can guarantee right now they're not finding it on their own. But the world's going to shove their word down their throat. I want them to know the word of God. I want them to hear what Jesus did, the sacrifice that he made. I want to tell you a story real quick. This is kind of embarrassing to me, but I want to say it. I have had a great track record in all my life of working with your kids. I've had 12 years of never having an injury, never losing a kid, never having one problem. Matter of fact, in kids ministry alone, as far as my girls' life in my Rangers Club, all the camps we've done never had one issue until 2023. A lot of you don't know this story, but I'm going to tell it to you because God is so awesome that he literally gave me this illustration a month before I preached. But he knew that I was speaking on the parable of the lost sheep. So for those of you who don't know, after my amazing kids camp and my amazing week at youth camp, I have to then do another third week at Ranger camp, and it happens to be up in the same area as kids in youth camp, up in Gore, Virginia, up in the mountains. We go to a Boy Scout camp called Enon Rock, and it's fantastic. I take kids there every year. I've done it for the last probably 6 years. Well, this year I said, you know what, I want an easy year. I was tired. I'm getting older, as Scott told me. These camps are just getting harder. I'm just going to be honest with you. I'm trying to shed some weight now so I can maybe keep up with these kids. But it's just getting harder on me. I just want to be transparent. So Scott's like, man, just take it easy. I said, you know what, I am. I'm just going to go up to this camp by myself. I'm the Southern Area Commander, so I got a responsibility to do. So I go up to this camp, what I thought was going to be by myself, but at the last second, my son and one of his friends say, hey, I want to go. I said, easy. 18, 16, too easy. I'll leave them alone. I'll do what I got to do, no bother. And that was the truth until the very last night. So the very last night, we're having a great service. It's getting ready to start. We're doing awards. Everybody's happy and cheering. And one of my Rangers, after dinner, one of the two, they go, hey, I want to go to the Pinnacle. I said, all right, cool, go to the Pinnacle. Well, the Pinnacle, to my understanding, is just a campsite within the campground. Just like they all have names. So there's Pinnacle, there's Southwest, there's all these different ones. So I think that's where they're going. So my son and this other guy take off. And they go to the Pinnacle, which should have been about a 4-minute walk tops. 6 o'clock. Now at about 7:30, here comes the other guy walking out of the woods. And I'm like, hey, man, that was a good walk? He goes, oh, dude, I couldn't make it. Like, I'm done. Oh, what's wrong, man? He goes, well, I couldn't make it up the Pinnacle. I said, how could you not make a 3-minute walk? He goes, no. We went to the Pinnacle, which is a 45-minute expedition, 1,500 foot above the elevation we were at 6 o'clock at night. You know what they took with them? Nothing. no water, basketball shorts, Vans, and a t-shirt. That's all they had. That's all they had. And they walked up to this pinnacle point, and the guy who's not my son couldn't make it all the way because the elevation changed and his asthma and everything kicking in. So he said, hey, you know what? I want to turn around. Lo and behold, my amazing son says, not me. I'm getting ready to go to college. I'm going up to the pinnacle to get this picture. Now, I have never taken them to the pinnacle. I have never been up there. So I said, hey, man, can I call him? He goes, no, he doesn't have a phone. I went, okay. Okay, so he doesn't have a phone. So he says, I gave him my phone. Well, does he know your passcode? No. Well, how is he going to call anybody if he doesn't know your passcode? Oh, you got to call him. Okay, cool. So I call him, hey, Casey, where are you at, bud? Yeah, I'm up at the pinnacle, Dad. I'm sorry, let me go back. I ring. Today's generation doesn't understand hellos. So I get, Dad, this place is awesome. You should check it out. I got some great pictures. I'm like, dude, I don't care. It's almost 7:30. You got service to be at. Yeah, Dad, I'm coming now. I said, it's 45 minutes. Service starts at 8:30. You need to hike it. So I get busy doing what I'm doing. All of a sudden, bam, time's done. It's been 45 minutes. I call him. Hey, where are you at? Yeah, I'm almost there, Dad. I hear. Like, where are you? I'm about 30 minutes out. I mean, how are you 30 minutes out? How are you 30 minutes out? It was 45 minutes ago. It's a 45-minute walk. My phone dies because I've been at the front gate all day, out in the hot sun, searching for signal. My phone dies. So now I'm paranoid. So I run back up to our campsite, put it on the truck charger, charges for 20 minutes before it finally gets in, and I go, oh, cool. It's charged. Call him up. I don't get the, hey, Dad, this is great. I get, hey. I go, okay, something's up. What's up, son? This was the most heart-wrenching time of my life. He goes, Dad, I'm sorry, I'm lost. What do you mean you're lost, son? There's this like four-wheel drive area down the street, and I thought I could make the path this way. I'm lost. How far lost are you? I don't know. If you ever, as a parent, lost one of your own, it was the most defenseless I've ever been in my entire life. I've been a shepherd to this kid for 18 years. And I remove it for just a few minutes, and he's gone. Now, I know now what God was doing. My son, adventurous as he is, thinks that sometimes the world can't hurt him, and he does crazy. I think God had to show him this so that he would go to college and not be crazy and do crazy things. And when I say crazy things, I don't mean like all the other crazy, like just be dumb. Be a boy. Anyway, at this point, I had to go down and say, hey, I had to stop service. They're in the middle, there's 400 kids praising God. I had to go and stop service. And I had to go to the camp director and go, man, my son's lost. We're at the pinnacle. And this is what's cool. This is where the illustration comes in. There are 3 guys there that had spent a week setting up this service. All the electrical, all the lights, all the sound, and everything. 400 kids standing there. They're getting ready to witness what God's going to do and all the glory that he's put upon this whole service that he's getting ready to have. Like, all the work they've put in, they're getting ready to watch that. Without hesitation, in full Ranger uniform, 3 guys jump in a go-kart, make the 45-minute hike, golf cart. They get to the trail, make the 45-minute hike to Pinnacle Point without hesitation. They leave the mass, the majority, to go after the one lost kid. 2.5 hours later, they find my son in a position that they would have never even looked if it wasn't for the cell phone that he had that had 45% power left on it, and they were able to track his geolocation via that. But he was 2.8 miles lost in the woods. And these guys left the mob, left the mass to search after the one. And I could not be more thankful, especially when I had to call my wife and tell her that my son was lost in the woods. I could have looked at it in one way, right? I could have looked at it this way. I could have said, well, I got 2 more kids. But sometimes we focus, I would never do that. But sometimes we do. We focus on what we still have left. We look at things and go, well, it's not that bad. You know, I still have this little bit. I've lost all of this, right? Just like you people here. If half the church left, I could go, well, I still get that core group. I still get that core group of people. If half my youth group left, I could look at it and go, well, I still have these 3 guys. I really love them. That's not the way we should look at things. We should not look at the sheep as sacrificial offerings that could just be thrown away and trashed. There's not a life in this room within the perimeter of my voice that does not have access or should not have access to God's kingdom and should not know the glory and the love of God. But we do. We say, oh, man, that's a sad thing. We lost, little Joey, he just turned away. Man, we'll pray for him. And that's it. Like, do we go after him? Do we chase after him? Do we seek that one? Or are we always just content with, well, we got these 5 over here. We got these 20 over here. We have to get our mind shifted to go, hey, I want to chase after that one. I want to be that shepherd in the story that Jesus tells. It's tough because Jesus is always seeking. He's always looking for you. But the world gets in the way. Our voracious appetite for what the world has gets in the way of us shepherding and of us being the sheep. We unfortunately get addicted to things very easy. I myself had to put my cell phone away in certain times because I'll sit there and just scroll aimlessly through stuff, and I'll have to go, hey, prayer moment. Like, I even have it in my phone set up so that the world doesn't mislead me. Because when you're 90% world and 10% God on Sunday, your shepherd is primarily the world. You need to switch yourself up. You need to change it to where 90% of your time is God and maybe 10% of the time is the world. I like to do 100% personally, but I'm an overachiever. So I'm a Eutropian, as I told you. That's something to think about today, guys. Like, what are we doing? Are we so addicted to the world, so addicted to the things that give us joy and pleasure instantly? I can tell you right now, the generation coming behind you guys, they're addicted to 20 seconds of fulfillment. And the world has taught us that. They have molded us into that. It doesn't matter if I jump, stand on my head, whatever it is, have crazy games. I can hardly keep the youth focused for more than 20 to 30 seconds at a time. It's almost like I have to speak in Facebook Reels or TikTok Reels. I mean, it really is. Trying to be a shepherd now in 2023 to a generation of the lost is tough. Now, I talked to you earlier today about that group that I go to, that place I go to once a week, where all these sinners and these church hurt people are, and these people that you would never see cross the threshold of a church. And that's my youth group. Every single week, I go into a building of people who need a shepherd. And they've been to other shepherds, other places, where they didn't feel loved, they were judged, they were punished, they were persecuted, they were felt to be less adequate than the holier-than-thou people that were in this building. But Res Youth offers a home. Now, I don't agree with 90% of their thought processes, And that's okay because it's not my job to change. And that's what we got to get into our minds. It's not our job to change their minds. It's our job to shepherd them. It's our job to lead them. Let God do the hard work. Our work's easy. They got to sit here just like you are, listen to what I have to say. But I've got kid after kid that comes in there that you would never see cross the doors of a church. And they say they feel welcomed. And I'm not saying that to boast my own thing. I'm saying that to encourage you guys. I got a kid that rides around in the parking lot of the church, and I had a beautiful youth student who dragged him off the street. Nobody knew this kid. Dragged him off the street and brought him into the church for a youth group one night. I saw him like 3 weeks later, and I said, hey, man, you ought to come to opening night this week. He said, yeah, I'm coming. I said, well, bring all your friends, buddy. He goes, oh, man, I don't have any friends. I said, what do you mean you don't have any friends? He goes, with my mental stuff, which he openly discusses with us, he said, I just don't have a lot of friends. He said, but I do love it there. I feel welcomed. I feel at home. I don't care about all those kids that are righteous and holy. I love them, but if I can grab that one guy off the street riding his bicycle through the LC elementary parking lot, that's the kid I'm going to go for. I know that my I'm just going to call you out, my Levi's and, my Ashers, my K6, like, I know they're good. Like, I talk to them, I love them. I'm going to have to chase after them. It's time for those guys to pick the mantle up and start shepherding downwards. It's time for our youth to stand up, but we have to set an example of what a good shepherd looks like. We have to sometimes make time to pour into them. And here's the other thing. When we got the lost out there, and this is my final part, I'll wrap up, there's joy and there's anger. All right? I want to go back and read verse 5. It says, and when he finds it, talk about the sheep, he joyfully puts it on his shoulders and goes home. Then he calls all his friends and neighbors together and says, rejoice with me, I have found my lost sheep. I think this is another mark that we miss. I think when we see the hurt, the broken, the lost, I think we're easier just to say, well, they need Jesus, but not here. We have a group of people out there that are so confused about life because they've eaten the world for so long. They're so confused. And the moment sometimes that they try to step foot within a church door, they're persecuted and ridiculed and turned away